Continuing our conversation now about Detroit Public Schools after Judge Rhodes has left us. I think it's very interesting, Nolan, that he's talking about one of his main jobs is also making sure that the right people or the best people for the job make themselves available to run for school board. Why is it so crucial to convince Detroiters that they are going to have a school board that's not of the school board of 20 years ago that people keep hearkening back to?
Or even 10. I mean, it's vital that you have good, strong, solid leadership. This won't work otherwise. If we go back to the sort of school board we've seen in the past year, where we've had illiterates on the board, we've had perverts on the board, we have people who are self-interested. This has to be an independent, competent board. If it's in the pocket of the unions, it's not going to work. If the folks go back to handing out contracts, to friends and family, it's not going to work. That's how this district got in trouble in the first place.
Okay, but it's April now. It's April, and you're looking about having an election in August.
I don't think
So do you find the right people for the job?
I think the timeline here is nuts. The likelihood of you producing a crop of candidates that's going to be about the right things and can campaign and raise enough money to win at the ballot box is really low. I also have a sort of philosophical problem with the idea of this election. We have an elected school board in the city of Detroit. That board, its term is not just over in August. I mean, I'm not sure what mechanism we're even using to say, well, those people are dismissed. Now, a lot of those people are wackadoodle characters and whatnot, but they were elected by the people. And it's also true that they haven't governed. I mean, these are not the people who screwed up the district. They haven't been in control for a single day since they've been elected.
But they ran for a position knowing that they wouldn't be governing a single day.
But figuring that someday democracy would be restored, and people voted for them thinking that. I'm not sure you can just abrogate that election or those elections in favor of this new one. That doesn't seem like
if
the
you
right
don't,
thing
there's
to
no
me.
point in doing this, because then this district is gone. You've got to have good, responsible
So it's okay
leadership.
just to make up the rules?
And you have people out there. Sheila Cockrell and Irv Reed at Wayne State are working on trying to develop talent and to also educate the community on what qualities they're going to need in new school leaders. Leadership's going to be essential if this is.
But see, is it okay to make up the rules to do that and to say, well, the elections that took place just don't matter, we're going to wipe them out? I think there's a real problem.
I mean, if they're operating under the emergency management law, they've got broad powers to dismiss the school board.
But isn't that what made people uncomfortable in the first place?
Yeah, no, they don't. The emergency manager law doesn't allow that. It doesn't allow the dissolution of elected bodies. This is all made up out of nothing. I mean, I think they're probably relying on the idea that they're creating a new district.
Well, it'll be in a new law, Steve. So I mean, they'll create the framework.
I have
for
a real
the new
problem
law.
with this.
All right, before we end our conversation here, I want to talk a little bit about these potential for payless paydays for the teachers, or the fact that Stephen Rhodes said, I'm not going to ask the teachers to work if they are not going to get paid. And right now we still don't have movement for that supplemental funding, that about $48 million that the district needs. Do we need to have that day where teachers don't show up, the entire district is shut down, for any kind of more movement to come out of this?
Well, I mean, that's a disaster situation, and you talk about losing enrollment. I think that would really exacerbate that problem. I would have preferred the legislature got that supplemental bill done, but that's just pushing the deadline down the road. They would have come back and then bargained again and stalled again until the next deadline came. There's huge philosophical differences on how the district's going to be managed and operated going out of this, and how much oversight the state's going to have, and how much control this Detroit Education Commission is going to have to pick and choose which schools close and which schools open. And I don't see them resolving that in a hurry.
I don't see them resolving it in a hurry either. And I think the opposition here has got to be called out on what's going on. I mean, there's an awful lot of paternalism that's driving this idea that people, Republicans from outstate, know what Detroit and Detroiters ought to be doing with their schools. There is a lot of anti-union bias that's driving this. Somehow now unions can't operate in Detroit the same way they do in other school districts, and there's a racist component here. I mean, again, this is the way that we have treated Detroit as a state for a really long time. It's not a mystery. Or not irrelevant that it's the largest black-controlled city in the state. These guys ought to be ashamed of themselves for some of the stuff that they're saying and some of the stuff that they're doing. It's reprehensible, and we're not going to get anywhere as long as that's going on.
Do they go behind the excuse, Nolan, of, well, if you want our money, then you have to play by our rules?
Well,
it's their money.
It's not an excuse. I mean, they are committing a great deal of money, and that money, no matter where they say they're getting it, whether it's the tobacco settlement fund or bonds or what have you, that money is ultimately coming out of every other school district in the state. And so they have an obligation to their own communities and to voters across the state to put some oversight on that money.
We're not being given any money. This is money that this is debt that they ran up. So the state's responsible for it.
It's still money coming out of the federal or the state treasury.
But to use that as predicate to punish Detroiters who had nothing to do with running up that debt is, again,
I don't think they're talking about punishment, but the
there's a
money's
lot
going
of
to have
doublespeak going
oversight
on here. It's absurd.
I mean, they're not just going to release that money and say, go ahead and
So
I don't think anybody would argue against having oversight.
Well, they certainly are. That's the dispute in the legislature.
Who ran up the debt?
now.
We didn't do it. They did.
Yeah, the debt. Come on, Steve. $2 billion of that debt was rocked
That's
up
not the debt.
before
But that's not the
state
debt that's
ever
being
took over.
relieved.
$2 billion was raised and backed by the
But
state.
they're not giving us that money.
To be spent on fixing the schools, and the schools never got fixed. And so there is some concern in the legislature about what happens to the money.